welcome to episode 8 of the Property Prescription with Tony and Phil. Today we're going to talk about Sydney versus Melbourne. So you were in Sydney just recently?
I go to Sydney a lot now for work.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been maybe almost 10 times this year, I think.
And how does it compare to Melbourne?
Yeah. So people who know me know that I wouldn't say it's a hatred for Melbourne, but I dislike Melbourne despite the fact I live in Victoria. So I lived in Melbourne for 20 years, and then I've now moved to Geelong because I just can't stand Melbourne anymore. And I apologise to the Melburnians. So I'm going to say some controversial stuff, so just bear with me. The problem with Melbourne is it's a big city that still thinks it's a town. It doesn't work. Like, you're either going to be an international city and grow into it, or you act like a quaint town, which it kind of used to be 20, 30 years ago. It was quaint and it was lovely. It had trams and, you know, traffic wasn't so bad. But now it takes 2 hours to go anywhere. The trams actually don't help because they run with the cars.
Absolutely.
In fact, it's the worst. People go on about how great Melbourne trams are, but it's actually the worst form of transport. So it's like a bus that can't turn, and it slows down the cars, and the car slows down the tram. So, like, they both destroy each other. In the city, it's not too bad. There are some lanes that are protected, so you can get along around the city. But once you're out of the city, what is the point of a tram if a bus would do just as good and it can actually turn and actually go like faster and go up? I think, I'm not saying get rid of the tram because that's very controversial. Turn them to like EV buses or something. It's quiet. At least they won't stuff up the way that we are driving right now. So that's like my pet hate. And that's an extremely controversial because Melburnians love their trams. But if you look at Sydney, they've installed their version of the tram, which is kind of like a light rail. And what they've done, this is why their version of the tram works, is they pedestrianised the entire path. So George Street, I'm not sure if you've been recently,
George
the
Street,
entirety of the George Street, that was like kilometres of road. All cars are gone. So now cars go where cars go, trams go where trams go. And now you've got a process where they're separated, they don't affect each other in traffic, cars can drive freely, trams can go freely. And it opens the city up and it makes it a much nicer place to get around and be. Well, Melbourne is just, and this is just my one of many parts that I dislike about Melbourne.
Yeah, well, I think, and if you look at Sydney, you look at the lifestyle that it actually creates versus Melbourne and the weather on top of that, it's a completely different lifestyle.
Unfortunately, Sydney is lucky in the sense that it has one of the best harbours in the world, so we can't compete with that. That's just bad luck from Melbourne's side. But what Sydney does, and this is from historical planning, which Melbourne has done poorly, is the hubs, right? I think when I first went there 20 years ago, CBD was kind of there. It was rough and tumble. Sydney CBD was terrible back in the day.
It was, yep.
Melbourne was brilliant. It was way better city than Sydney. I think Melbourne is still resting on its laurels, always the most livable city in the world. It's dropping down the list
losing that
rapidly.
very quickly.
What Sydney has done is they has invested in public transport, put the hubs into these regional, not regional, they're suburbs, right? Chatswood, I went there. It used to be it still is a very Chinese-centric place because they go there to eat.
Parramatta as well. Yep.
Train goes there. Now they have the metro. And then you come out surrounded by skyscrapers. It's its own little CBD. And you come out, there's like an opera house in... Did you know there is actually an opera house in Chatswood?
Yeah, sure did.
They have an underground library. They've got parks that's in between the apartments. And Sydney apartments are actually livable.
Yeah, well, I think that's the big difference between Melbourne units and owner-occupier Melbourne units and Sydney owner-occupier units. There's a complete difference. And Sydney-siders are used to living in units.
Yeah.
Melbourneites want the house. They want the house on 1,000 square metres. You know, they want to be in Bayside, eastern suburbs. They want the big house. And I think for Melbourne to mature, we've got to get used to living in apartments. But I think the design, the element in terms of developers introducing good quality owner-occupier type apartments to live in, we need to start promoting that.
This is where I said, like, Melbourne still thinks it's a town.
Country town.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Sydney has decided its population is growing. It's looking to Asia and Europe. You need apartments that has big balconies and need apartments with livable bedrooms. I went to some apartments in Melbourne. They're like they're 2.5 meters wide. You can
Yeah.
barely fit a queen size bed in there. You go to Sydney, yes, they're still small, but they're designed for people.
Yeah.
And you take the elevator down, there's a train station right there, there's supermarkets, there's restaurants, there's libraries. Every single hub has interconnectivity. And the new metro system, doesn't even matter how far you are. You get straight into the city. If you want to go to the airport, that's another 10 minutes. It just works.
We don't even have an airport rail tunnel in Melbourne. We've been talking about this for how long? This has been an ongoing argument for almost 30 years, and it's still going.
And get this, so they have the new airport, right? Hasn't worked, hasn't opened. The train to the airport has already opened. So they got trains to the airport that hasn't even started. We have an airport that apparently has been building this train line for 30 years.
Yeah.
It's never going to happen.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we're in pretty serious debt at the moment as a state, but we won't get political today.
Yeah.
But it's the lifestyle. So the pricing of housing, the pricing of apartments. Sydney-siders are used to living in apartments. Melbourneites aren't, and so we either need to improve the quality of what we're building in Melbourne, and people need to get used to living in apartments.
And this is even more controversial, despite the fact that Sydney house prices is absolutely insane. And
Yes, they are.
and completely irrational from my point of view. I consider that they're priced appropriately compared to Melbourne,
Because of the lifestyle.
because let's say you spend $1 million buying a 2-bedroom apartment in a random suburb. The lifestyle you get there is significantly better than $1 million, let's say a 4-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, because you have all those amenities. You have the public transport. You have gardens and parks. Have you heard of the suburb Mascot, which is
Yes.
literally one
Yep.
stop up?
Sure
from
have.
I go past it. I never stopped there. I had a couple of hours. So I'm like, I might as well stop at Mascot. They had maybe 20 or 30 apartments, mid-rise, maybe 10 levels high. Between each apartment was a park. And in each park, one was a playground. Another had just restaurants flowing into the park where people eat in the park. Another one had cafes. And another one was an entrance to the subway, to the metro. It just worked.
Yeah, and areas like Newtown that have gentrified off King Street. You go to King Street now, and the quality of food that you get on King Street and access to parks, Camperdown next to the hospital there, fantastic.
Yeah.
It's actually a good life for a young doctor, even wanting to rent in those areas. The problem is the rents in Sydney are quite high as well, but people are still paying it because of the lifestyle.
Yeah, despite how crazy it is, and I'm not saying it's not crazy, you do get a lot for you get bang for your buck. And I don't think any other city in the world right now has the mix of the natural scenery, which again, it's just stroke of luck, the public transport.
It's definitely improved.
Yeah, 100% improved. And the quality of life that you get. I think Sydney is the best city in the world right now.
Wow, that's a big
at
call.
this moment.
Big
Melbourne
call.
used to be, but we just need to grow up. And we literally have an example 900 kilometers away.
Yeah,
Like
we've lost our mojo and we need to get it back, I think, if you're living in Melbourne. I think the other issue in Sydney that we've always grappled with, 30% of the workforce in Sydney come from a financial insurance related type industry. So when you have a GFC or there's a correction, those are probably the opportunistic times for you to start buying. And we last saw that in the last GFC that we had in 2008, 2009, when we started taking allocation in there for our doctors. So it was a great time, but you have to time the market. The affordability index in Sydney, do you know what it is? Do you want to have a guess? So if you had a 20% deposit and you went to the bank and you borrowed 80%, or because you're a doctor, you can probably get 95%, how much of your income would go into service that home loan debt? What do you reckon it is?
like 70, 80% or something?
89%. So this is the conundrum that we're in. So
That's just outrageous.
it's crazy.
Yeah.
And do you know what it is in Melbourne at the moment?
40?
Yeah, not that far, 55%.
Oh,
So 55% of your income is going to service home loan debt if you're a Melbourne sider.
that's quite high, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah.
And when Melbourne hits around 40, 45%, it starts to represent value. And Sydney's traditionally, looking at the cycles, has always run at around that 55 to 60%. Because it's higher. It's a higher entry point. But Sydney is very much a global city. Melbourne is trying to get there, but it hasn't quite reached it at the moment.
Yeah.
So
Look, I think these things fluctuate. 10 years ago, Melbourne was, to me, significantly a better place to live than Sydney. And Now it's kind of switched, but maybe another 10 years we'll switch back. But we don't know. Currently, the way Sydney's going, I think there's a lot to learn. Melbourne has a lot to learn from how a big city should be.
I completely agree. And Wollongong, your experience in Wollongong and Newcastle and some
I did
of
a
these
road
areas?
trip, and so I currently live in Geelong, and I did a road trip to Wollongong, which is kind of the Geelong of Sydney. And again, very unfair because Wollongong has geographic things that Geelong don't have, like a surf beach that's very pretty. It has escarpment, like a mountain behind it that has amazing views. Geelong itself is also pretty in the Victorian kind of way. It's much flatter. The beach is not too bad. But for the same population, which is 300,000, maybe Wollongong's a tiny bit bigger, but roughly the same population, Wollongong felt like a city. It had public transport. It had a free bus that went around the city, electrified train that went into Sydney. So you can literally go from Wollongong past all the tourist towns straight into Bondi Junction on the same train. Well, Melbourne public transport to Geelong, it's still diesel, right? So that makes a huge difference. And then Geelong currently still feels like a country town that's about to grow.
It's moving along.
Yeah.
I think we've looked at the data for Geelong, and land sales are starting to be absorbed again, and house prices are starting to go on a little bit of a run. They haven't quite recovered, but the signs of recovery are starting to show for the first time in 3 years.
Okay. Yeah, I think the vibe I got, Geelong, it's definitely in the last few years felt, because I've only been there for 5 years, the last couple of years, I think Geelong, it's just starting. I feel like there's a twinkle or something happening.
Yeah. Prices doubled because they had a very large manufacturing sector. In the 70s, 80s, 90s, Ford pretty much dominated in that manufacturing sector. When that started dying down, new government industry started moving into Geelong. And then we started to see the gentrification of Geelong happen in 2013, 2014. In the space of 2013 to 19, prices doubled within that 6-year period. And now we've got a little bit of a balanced view in terms of house prices, not moving, but just staying at a certain value. But you can buy a really good quality house in Geelong for 1 to 2.5 mil in a really blue chip suburb. So it's still evident, but Sydney and Melbourne, a lot of our doctors are talking about it. A lot of our doctors are even moving to southeast Queensland. They're moving up to Sunshine Coast, Maroochydore, Mooloolaba. We've seen a lot of, for work as well, because they're chasing the lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah, and the weather, obviously. Just one last point about Geelong. I feel like Geelong is getting that improvement, and I think Wollongong is almost where, like, Melbourne should look to Sydney, Geelong should look to Wollongong.
Absolutely.
It's similar.
Yep. Yeah, spot on. There's some data and research in terms of tracking regionals that have a population of more than 100,000, and we're looking at the relationship in terms of growth. We track every infrastructure project above 10 mil as a business and how that affects value. Townsville's been a big one that we're keeping our eyes on. So it's been really interesting in terms of where the doctors are moving to. A few of them moved to Darwin as well, which has been interesting. And Perth. We're seeing a lot of doctors shift over from the East Coast over to the West Coast because they're paying them more as well. Are you seeing that?
No, I got to look into that then.
Yeah. Anyway, well, I think we'll leave it there for today. We'll talk about the next episode on the first home buyer grant. I think that's a good topic for us to discuss in our next.
A lot of the people that I've been talking to are really interested in how that's going to affect the outlook. So let's talk about it next time.
Great. Fantastic. Thanks, Tony.